And now on to our main topic this week, designing an RPG starting village. Uh, we switched from Shadow Dark to world building for a couple of episodes, and we really got a big uh, boost in feedback about, oh, this is what I come to your show for. Let's get some more of this. So we're gonna dig a little bit into that. Uh, for this reason also. In the last few weeks, I've had to create for a couple of different projects two new starting villages from the ground up, and also uh, did some outlining for other ones. And then I had to think about them as starting points for adventures or for campaigns. So I harken back to that world building that the conversation we've been having. So I really wanted to talk about it some more. Uh, so let's dig into world building via a starting village for your adventures or for your campaign. Did you have anything to say just in general about this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I love it because I've often been impressed by products that will do one of two things. Give you an enormous amount of lore that you can't use. So
Hmm.
here's everything about this town. Oh, hey, the adventure happens in the tavern and at the docks, and the rest of it was useless. Or um, it sets up a really interesting and kind of enchanting place, and then you never come back to it for the adventure anyway. So why did we work that hard when we're leaving it all behind? And those aspects have always interested. I can't help but think of village building and think about those two issues that always kind of get under my skin.
Yeah. And the history of D&D has a history of these villages. They seem to go hand in hand with D&D. One of the first adventures I remember playing was Village of Hamlet,
Yeah.
obviously, which was meant to be the lead in to the Temple of Elemental Evil, although it took close to 10 years, I think, or maybe even more, uh, or maybe
Hmm.
just maybe 8, uh, for that big Temple of Elemental Evil adventure to come out. So people would, oh, I have to start a new campaign. I'm going to plop down Hamlet and we're going to
Right.
use this again. Um, and that
Hmm.
sort of introduced villages as starting points, villages as hubs for adventurers. And we learned what that sort of design looked like to do well, or what it looked like when it maybe wasn't done so well, and what else was needed.
Yeah,
Um,
and if I could
that,
say, Hamlet
yeah.
is interesting because it's from this kind of older school of thought of sort of being very encyclopedic, right? Every house
Mm,
detailed, how many copper pieces are hidden, in the false post of the bed and things like that, and what
yeah.
the farmer in this place is into, and the name of all their kids and stuff like that. And on one hand, that was amazing because when you started to know, like if you used Hamlet several times, well,
Mhm.
boy, you started to really know that village and you could really breathe some life into it. And the fact that the adventure and the system itself required you to go back and rest all the time meant constant interactions there. And so that was very useful. But as you started going into the future of D&D and the way the gameplay changed and the characters changed, it was a lot, right? And if you looked at
Mm,
it through fresh eyes, you realized, man, trying to read you can't separate what's important and what's not. And also the adventure itself can be very boring if someone walks in on the intended road and the
mhm.
first 5 buildings have nothing to do with anything. And yeah, they can be fun interactions, but they can also be pretty lame. And
Yeah.
and so then you start revisiting how should we do this, right?
Right. Right. And it introduced DMs to that dilemma of, all right, my player is going to investigate everything.
Mm,
So I need to put something cool in everything, even though these first 5 buildings are just farmhouses. Uh, okay, so now I need to do something cool. Okay, this farmer is actually a werewolf. Da da da. Okay. And oh, you go to the next one. All right, I need to do cool something here. And before you know it, you've overextended yourself, and now you've got 27 different plots going on.
yeah.
And you haven't even gotten to the plot that you had planned on
Yeah.
doing.
And we
So
we
it
see
was sort of
this
instructive.
even in the starter set, right? Like I like the design of Fendolan in the starter set, but if you look at sort of how it plays out for a new DM,
Hmm.
all the plots are there all at once,
Hmm.
running into your DM brain, especially if you're a
Yeah.
new DM. And it's really overwhelming how many things there are happening all at once when there's some obvious, here's really where we want to go.
Mhm.
But the campaign, the book isn't necessarily leading you there, right? Because it just
Yeah.
vomits forth all the info.
Yep. So going on this idea that there are different kinds of world building, especially from bottom up or top down, starting with a village where the characters will start their campaign or their adventure is one of the most bottom up world building techniques you can have. So you're starting with what your characters will be touching first, which is a location probably within this village, either walking
Mm,
into town or already starting in the town. Uh, so we'll say that your characters are going to start in a town, but you want to put them in a building. So we're going to say a temple rather than a tavern. All right. The priest or the priestess or the acolyte is going to be the one to give them the adventure. So I'm going to start in a temple.
mm,
How do you start? What do you start with? Um, there are different ways you can do this. The first thing you might want to do is think, what will my players ask? What will they ask about? Will they ask what the structure looks like? Possibly. So you may want to make a note about that.
sure.
What about the interior? Okay, without going into too many details, you'll just get an idea of what the interior is. How will that be decided? It might be decided by what god, goddess, or pantheon the temple is set up to. So now we've already gone top from bottom up to okay, gods. I need to think of gods. So what sort of thing? You don't have to answer all those questions right now. You don't need to denote
Right.
what every god is, but you can just say, all right, this is since it's in a port, this is going to be a sea god, or since it's in a field, or in a plains area, it's going to be a nature farming god. All right, now I will move on. Uh, so you've already started working your way up or working your way out by asking what god. Uh,
Mhm.
so now you ask yourself, are there going to be encounters taking place here? And if so, what do I need for those? Or is it just going to be the plot hook is delivered? So what do I need to know for that? And so you start with just that location and those questions. But those questions that you answer will spur different elements that you're going to create.
Yeah.
So start thinking immediately about what the utility of the place is, as opposed to just trying to build it because it's there.
And I'll say that in this process, which I really like that you're describing, one of the keys is kind of having the theme in mind or starting to develop the theme that you're going to have for this location, which I know you're going to talk about next. But as we're working on this temple, right, we might want, it's not like we just roll a D100 and decide what the god is. That's a purposeful decision because it's going to color things, right? If we're on a coastal town, the god shouldn't be the god of the mountains unless the mountains so loom over this coastal town that they're actually bigger than an Umberly type, you know, uh, ocean god or weather god, right? But it's probably going to be more like that unless there's some other reason, like this is such a mercantile place that then it's going to be a god of finance or or whatever it might be, or this was such a hard fought place that it's a god of war because it was the conquest of this from other peoples that led to whatever it is. But that tells your story and starts putting in those themes, because the reality in all play is you have surprisingly small amount space of time and words and all of that to paint your picture, so everything should be part of that painting, right?
Mhm. Yep.
Or most things should be.
Right. And then you would, when you get at least a base for this temple, you need to ask, okay, where do they go next? Is the next
Mhm.
step that they're going to go to the inn to get rooms, or is it they're going to go to the sheriff's to find information? So you sort of move along the plot that you are at least planning to make the next location. And each time you create a location, you're adding more depth to the village, the town, the city as a whole. Uh, and then at some point, you need to answer the question for yourself: what is the purpose of this village? Because what the purpose of the village within your story, whatever that is, will inform its design.
Hmm.
So, for example, is this village going to be used as a base where the characters constantly return to? Is it their safe space where they go out on adventures, but once they come here, you could sort of take your armor off and not worry and spend a week without having to roll random encounters? Is that the purpose? Is this a place where the adventures start from? So even though adventures might take place in another location, the adventure actually starts in the village because the catalysts of this story, right? The the two temples are the god of war and the god of something, and they're at each other's throats
Right.
constantly. So that's going to be the impetus for it. So that will mean you have to create this village in a different way. Are you going to be running adventures and encounters within the village itself,
Hmm.
like Orlane in against
Cult
the
of the
Call of the Reptile God? That was meant for encounters to be run there, so it needs
Yeah.
to be designed slightly differently. You have to answer those questions as you are building these locations and other parts of the village to get it to work exactly as you need it to.
Yeah, and the idea of a village as a base is really great. It takes a little more work in these editions. We see that in Shadow Dark, right? Where it was like, how long are you going to press your luck exploring? Because eventually you're going to run out of light and you're going to run out of health, and you need to get back and you need to sell your loot and convert it. And so
Mhm.
you're going to get your XP and your coins and all of that and do downtime only by getting back to civilization, right? But we can still play off of that as well. And you and I reviewed the what's it called? Keep on the Shadowfell.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
in that, there's some nice design around the what's it called? It's called Winter Haven, the town in there,
Mhm. Mhm.
where not only are there interesting NPCs, but the NPCs sort of have new things to say when you come back, having discovered other stuff, which keeps it alive, right? And that's one of the things you can look at too when you're designing a village is if I'm going to come back to this, are there new things that can it play out over time? Because I don't necessarily need to cover it all initially. So maybe we go to the temple, but we go to the guilds after the first adventure or whatever, right? And then we get to tell new aspects of the story of this place
Mhm.
relevant to the plot, because we're thinking that way, and that lets us design differently.
Yeah. You don't want your village to be more interesting than the adventures that the
Hmm.
characters are going to go on. And that sort of gets to that Village of Hamlet example of trying to add cool things as players investigate. And pretty soon they don't care about, the Earth cult or
Yeah,
the Moat House because look at all the cool stuff happening here. Uh,
yeah,
so that's one thing. But you do want it to be interesting enough that players will still want to explore it in time
yeah.
to learn what it can offer them, both in terms of the mechanics, magic weapons, potions,
Yeah,
selling
Storm
things.
King,
Mhm.
it's interesting in that it has those three starting locations.
Right.
And there are some details in those that it's like, when is this coming up? What am I
Mhm.
hanging around here and like, am I
Yeah.
fighting some of these townsfolk? Or like, why do I need to know these various bits?
Yeah.
It doesn't serve the purpose of what the story is doing. And boy, by the way, we're going to leave it and never come back to it and care about it
Yeah.
again. So,
Right. Yeah. And if it is going to be a hub, this village, going to be a base or the safe space. You do want to leave room to show changes and consequences of the character's
mhm,
successes, failures, inaction, choices, and so on. Because otherwise, it's just a static thing. And it's a
yeah,
tool that you can use storytelling wise to show some of the things that you otherwise wouldn't be able to show. The general store is basically bare. Why? Because the bandits that you didn't go investigate and instead went to the lost temple now got the last three caravans coming through that had goods.
Yeah.
You can't buy any more rations, or you can't buy any more blank because of that. That breathes life into your story.
Yeah. Yeah. Those ways of nailing down the character of the place are really important, right? Where if you if you don't know, think of of like a checklist of things the character should be able to answer after having spent some time there, right?
Mhm.
How does this building survive? Why is it situated here? Who's in charge of it? What are the main power brokers? Those don't have to be the point of things, but if your
Mhm.
town is going to feel cohesive, the village should have those things
Mhm.
represented, right? Like over time, you
Right.
should get it. Like I think one that's done really well in fifth edition, in what is otherwise an up and down adventure, is in Princes of the Apocalypse. Red Large has a
Mhm.
lot of you know, these people make wagons. These people mine stone that is sold off to this other city, and it tells you which one. And so you get it. You get that there are farmers, and there's this mining taking place of marble, and there's the Wainwright, and then they also color it with there are a couple of factions going on, right? Both
Mhm.
the sort of fifth edition factions, but also some sort of cultist evil stuff,
Mhm.
and that layers things where almost any location is in a camp of neutral with the village or in with part of this cult or part of this other
Yep.
thing, right? And so that then allows you to tell the story better over time with that.
Yep. And that's where you get into the second one question I had there, or the second point, which was a place to introduce adventures from. That's where you need the instigators to be a part of the village so that the players aren't going to know this, but they're going to figure it out over time. They may, especially if they're veteran players, they're not like, okay, we're going back to town. The town is totally safe, and that's going to be what this is. But then things start happening, and now the town turns into the generator of the adventure rather than just a safe space.
Yeah.
And that's when you do things like factions. That's
Hmm.
when the plots of the dungeon interweave with the plots of civilization. Undermountain is great. Undermountain is much greater when Waterdeep is tied to it, right?
Yeah.
When something happening in Undermountain could affect Waterdeep.
Hmm.
When the politics of Waterdeep send something into Undermountain that you then have to go find.
Yeah.
All of that begins working together to deepen the story because
Right.
of the village, or the city in this case, that you've chosen to work within your campaign.
Mm. Yeah, I love that.
And yeah, and the final one, a place to run adventures in. If the starting point is also going to be the adventure site, you need to think about those sites as well. Uh, Certain locations will probably not become important until down the road. So you need to make sure you know enough about them to present them in a way that the players, when they get to that location 5 levels from now, when they realize that the owner of the tavern is really a vampire spawn who's keeping its master in its basement, you need to have given just enough information so the players go, oh, that's why
Hmm.
it was always closed during the day, but only opened after 5 p.m. Or, oh, I remember that one NPC disappeared and he was last seen there. That's why. Okay. It can't be too obvious because then they'll try to investigate it right away.
Right.
But you need to give just enough of that tease that it's an aha moment and an of course moment at the same time.
Hmm. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, and depending on the size of your village and what's going on, the whole faction piece is a nice way to tell a story too, right? Because it allows you to color the town in certain ways that kind of does more lifting for you, right? If you are saying that the vampire is part of a certain guild and they control it, or a faction, right? It's the leadership of the town, or it's the old council that gathers on weekends to influence how the village should be run. Then that can explain a lot, right? Or if it's part of the merchants that always do this particular, they're responsible for the money in the place, then you can kind of paint with that brush, and all of the things can go towards supporting each other. All of the things that are happening with that merchant side can then
Mhm.
support the story that you're weaving.
Yep. So the final question I'm going to bring up is actually multiple questions, which is, what are some things that you definitely need when you create this starting village for your adventure or
Mm.
for your campaign? Um, and the answer is some you probably need, some you probably don't need, but it all depends on what you're using that t- village, that adventure impetus for. So, do you need in a starting village a reason for the characters to be there?
Mm.
Sometimes. If you tie a character's goals to the town, that can often be a good hook. You are going here because blank, because you've heard rumors about something, because you need information to achieve a further goal, right? A goal to go there is is handy, but it's not necessary. They could just be traveling along that road because that's where they were traveling at the time.
Yeah, and
But then you quickly need to get to a reason for them to be there.
yeah, and that's where I think that you can approach it either of those ways, right? You can have a wide variety of why they're here, but why should the characters care and why should they interact? That's going to need to be there, right? So, like we did in the Act Inc. book, there was one of the parts where we wrote that you go to Luskin,
Mhm,
and Luskin's big. It's not a village; it's
mhm.
a big city, and so
Right.
they could get really lost. So one of the things that we did is the scene literally has someone getting thrown out of a tavern, a violin flying through the air, that or whatever it is, some musical instruments
Mhm.
that you can choose to grab, and this person that clearly has a problem and needs help. So it's just the adventure finds you and
Right.
gets you involved. And through this person, you can learn about the things that are in your quest. You can get leads that takes you to somewhere else where you can then, really follow sort of the steps in your adventure. That helps you get past the why am I here? What am I doing? What's the point?
Mhm.
Um, there's an adventure that I've worked on where everybody's coming to this town with a minor quest. And it's just a small minor thing. Sometimes they're kind of funny, but what it does is it requires you to talk to a village in this small, or to an NPC in this small village. And so you
Mhm.
get to know the village and the character of it, and you now have reason to understand everybody and you care about it because you
Yep.
have had to talk and interact with them. Now these people matter to you. They're important. You understand the character of the village. Now you're in a
Yep.
great position to save it.
Yep. Exactly. And even if you are the DM who says, I don't want to railroad my players' characters. I don't want to tell them what to do. I want them to just do whatever they want. A village is still good because even though you're letting them do whatever they want, even if there's 20 businesses or 20 buildings, that's at least narrowing it down to 20
Right.
things.
And
Uh,
railroading is really when they say, "Oh man, there's a circus in town. Let's go there." And you say, "No,
mhm,
you need to go to the docks."
right.
Right? That's a railroad because all
Yep.
the other stuff's useless. You must go here. Useful and not railroading, can feel very good is, boy, we're looking for clues about which pirate's involved. Hey, this random person you bump into has some window into that and can provide
Mhm,
clues for you and send you to the right place. That's not a railroad. That is what you want. That's what you're looking
right.
for. You know?
Right.
And if you
Yeah.
want to use other means to get there, you can as well. But boy, look, you've
Mhm,
got some answers already. And it frees you up to be creative around what you do with the information, right? You can also be linear and boring, right? If
mhm.
you run into somebody and they tell you everything you need to know, and then you just listen to them and then go to that place, well, that's boring. It's not about the railroad part of it. It's about the fact that there's nothing for you to do here, right?
Right.
Sometimes you see that in adventures where it's you meet the NPC and you listen to them and you've got nothing to do but go to that next place. Well, that's boring.
Yeah. Yeah. Or you don't know where to go, so you go to the next place, and that's also boring. And
Yeah.
then you go to the next place and you're searching your players are searching for the adventure
Yeah.
and are being kept from it by a predetermined vision of
Yeah.
what this world is.
Yeah. So with the
Uh,
in the village context, hopefully what's happening here is that you are getting an understanding of what this place is.
mhm,
You've got you either had a reason to be there and that's progressing, or now that you've gotten here because it was just supposed to be a place to stay for the night, something has happened that interests you, right? And
mhm.
you care about it, are interested in it, and want to see how it goes. So you're taken off from there, and meanwhile
Yep.
learning about the character of the place.
Yep. So a reason to be there? Yes, at some point. Doesn't have to be immediately, but should be coming to them pretty quickly. NPCs to interact with. Always. I'm going to say pretty much always.
Yeah,
Uh, Not just to get them into the story, but to give you a voice to talk to the characters through in an in-character manner. So you need those
yeah.
ins, you need those ways.
And role playing is such a big part of a game that you want interesting characters, right? Like
Mhm,
quirky people that can reflect or contrast with the nature of the
mhm,
town. Like one of the 5e towns that I really like is what Scott creates, Scott Fitzgerald Gray in the Hidden Halls of Hazakor. He has a town that you're meant to come back to, and it has some interesting people. So things like the person you're going to sell your treasure to, there is an interesting piece there. And so it'll
mhm,
play out over time and have something for the players to interact with and think about and all right. So you can think through that like, oh yeah, definitely I want NPCs. How do I make them interesting? Well, are they aligned with against your goals? Do
mhm,
they have a quirk that you're gonna have fun with? Do they have something that you need to solve for them, right? Like, and they may not even ask for the help, but you sense they need that help, right? Those kinds of things create
mhm.
really great, interesting play.
Yep. And think ahead to what the characters may want to
Mm.
do down the road in their adventuring career, in the plot that they're following, in the story that you're telling with them, because you want to introduce those NPCs a little bit ahead of time, uh, just so when it does come up that they're needed, the players will say, "Hey, isn't there a jeweler in town that you've mentioned? All right, yes, let's go to the jeweler to study this gem that we found in the eye of the idol because it's
Mhm.
magical and they might know."
Yeah.
So yeah. Next is locations. Do you need those? Yeah, generally, yeah. You don't need to make too many, but you need to put in the ones that are either useful immediately or will be useful down the line. Um, Adding more than you need does give depth to the world. It does give depth to the stories. But getting too deep in world building sometimes drowns the players.
Yeah.
Uh, so you have to take into account what sort of verisimilitude that the players want. Do they want to go, you know, to a different butcher, baker, uh, or is just like one foodstuffs person enough
Yeah.
to get everything done?
Well, and one thing you want to not do is like ignore the thing that will likely come up, right? So
Yeah.
in a small village, if someone's looking for rumors or information, heading to the tavern or inn makes
Mhm.
sense. And if you don't detail that, well, then now your DM's got to just improvise on the fly. And it doesn't take a lot. Like you could just detail the person who maintains the tavern or who's on duty there, and one interesting customer, and the
Yeah.
few lines about the general character, and now they've got all they need to go. It reminds me of often in big city adventures in Living Greyhawk organized play campaign, folks would start to play other adventures where you do things like go to the Library of Greyhawk for information. So anytime
Mhm.
they were in Greyhawk, if they ran into a lore pond, they'd be like, "Can we go to the library?" And a lot of times the adventurer hadn't thought of that. And it's like, well, by now, in this point in the campaign, players know that there is a giant library with all kinds of lore. They're going to
Right.
want to go there. Like, oh, it's closed today? Like, what do you. So
Yeah.
it was fun to see sometimes DMs go, like, I don't know what to do right now.
Right.
The same thing can happen in a village, right? Where if you want to deal with certain types of issues, and that's probably where you want to think through what are my plots? And
Mhm.
is there naturally some sort of place that they're just going to go to, right?
Mhm. That's exactly right. Then we get to the theme. Does a village need a theme? And the answer is no, but it doesn't hurt. It can
Yeah.
be very useful to you as a storyteller and to the players as agents of that story to um, have a theme in mind so that you can continue to stress something that a player might be trying to gravitate toward or to hold on to. So we already used the example of a port
Mm-hmm.
village versus one that's a farming community in the plains versus one in the mountains. That's a sort of theme that you can use, the location. You can also use a theme that's a little more esoteric, like gloomy
Mm-hmm.
or
It's falling
um,
apart.
or falling apart, right? Or festive.
Mm-hmm.
Everyone in town parties, and it's always Oktoberfest
Yeah.
in this town, and that's okay too, right? Artsy,
Yeah.
or
Yeah.
very agrarian. Not that those two have to be mutually exclusive, but
Mm-hmm.
uh, given
Yeah,
a
is it on the
theme,
rise? Is it in
right?
decline? Right? Like
Yep.
those things can all be really useful. And one interesting thing to look at is like if you look at the 10 towns of Icewind Dale and they try
Mhm.
to characterize some of the towns really just sink into like obscurity of your
Mhm.
brain and others, oh yeah, this is the one that makes all the beer.
Yeah.
Right. So I remember that one, and this is the one with the big keep, and this is like so what makes your place stand out and
Mhm.
amongst other villages, especially if they're going to visit other places. How does this
Yep.
stick in their mind for the players, and give them something that is useful.
Yep. And the last one I'll ask, even though there's many more, I'm sure, is does the town need a history?
Hmm.
And the answer is not really, unless the history is important to the current action or to what the characters will be interacting with down the line. Um, Forever, Village of Hamlet talks about the Battle of Emerald Meadow or
Meadows.
something.
Hmm.
And and uh and I was just like, as I'm reading, I'm like, okay, this doesn't really help me run this adventure. Sure, this happened back then, and it was the rise of the temple the first time, but it doesn't really. You could play the adventure
Yeah.
never knowing that history, uh, and it sort of felt a little indulgent.
Hmm. Oh
It's
yeah.
like, whoa, we played this as our players, so we are going to add this now to show. And I
Hmm.
guess it's cool if you're one of the players in that
Sure.
game,
Yeah.
but it doesn't really add anything to the story going forward. As a DM, you can certainly think it's cool and you can tie it to it, but it doesn't go back and except for the video game where you can go to the battlefield
I love that.
and
Yeah.
uh
That
and
was great.
dig up some things. Yeah, that was cool. Now, if
Yeah.
that had happened during the actual Village of Hamlet adventure, that would have
Yeah.
been, something else, but it didn't.
Yeah, and I think that's where you want to look at what the point of your village is periodically, and reassess, is what I'm building on point, right? If this is a stop along the way where some questions are answered, then focus on that, right? Don't get lost in the Battle of Emerald Meadows or any of these other things because that's just too much, and we're going to leave anyway. Don't create a giant plot for the players to explore, right? Like you don't need a conflict between the town council and the merchants if the players aren't meant to solve it or really even
Mhm.
interact with it. Beware doing that, and then suddenly that becomes the adventure, and you're intending for them to move on and go somewhere else, and then they want to fix the
Yeah.
town council, right? Run for
Right.
mayor or any of that, right? If you're going to do
Right.
that, then you want that to be a possibility that they could actually
Right.
win or any of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And if you're creating something for your own home campaign, obviously do what you like,
Hmm.
right? But when we talk about the things that you don't need, it's because you might like them, but not everyone will.
Yeah.
And you always risk by putting in things that you think are cool, but that aren't necessarily important. You run the risk of losing the DM or losing or help
Players.
forcing the DM to lose the players as the DM tries to make this important when it's really not. So just keep that in mind as you say, but I love the Emerald Meadows thing. That was the coolest thing. For you, yes,
Yeah.
and that's great. Not for everyone.
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing about Hamlet is I think I love so many different things that are in that town because I've played it and ran it so many times that it made sense to me. But it was hours of play that were unfocused and yeah, if it had been pared down to reflect the scenes or for example with Lost Mines of Phandelver, if the town's quests kind of came in waves, it would be a lot
Mhm.
easier to run. And then it would allow you to have those waves tell a better story, right? Why are we just going out to this random place to do this quest? Well, because it links in the following way, right? Or
Mhm.
because winning
Yep.
this NPC over leads to the town, accepting you as heroes and then asking this of you, right? We start telling better stories when we can channel that experience, and the village is a powerful means by which we get to do that, right?
Yep. There you go. So that is our look at the starting villages. We've also looked at the starting scenes of many different adventures. And you can go back in our catalog to look at some of those where we would have discussed these areas as
Mhm.
starting locations for adventure. Uh, Teos, thank you for sharing your expertise.
And you.
And thank you to all of our listeners. We appreciate you taking the time each week to listen to us talk about our favorite hobby. If you are a supporter of our Patreon, we thank you as well. If you're a Master of Dungeons supporter, you are what we are here for. So thank you. Our Master of Realm supporters get a shout out in our show notes. And our Master of the Multiverse patrons, well, you get a shout out right now. Keith Ammon of the Monsters Know What They're Doing, Lou Anders of Crazy Lazy Wolf Studios, Craig Bailey, Steve Bissonette, Merrick Blackman, Evil John, Darren Chandler, Seth Eckel, Andy Edmonds at nerdronomicon.com, Nathan Fuller, The Mighty Jerd, Ben Heisler and Paige Lightman, Sean Hurst, Chad Jackson, Brian King, Jim Klingler, aka DM Prime Mover, Chad Lench, The Mathemagician, Eric Mengi, The Micro Ant, Sean Molly, Falcon Neal, Tom Nelson of The Deck of Player Safety, Mike Olson, Mighty Zeus, Post Fiction RPG Audio, Robert Pasley, Vladimir Prenner from Croatia, Chance Russo at Drago Russo, Ross Sandberg, Andy Shockney, Krishna Samose, Trace, Joe Tyler, James Walton, Graham Ward, Xavier Waziak, and Chris Webster. Thank you so much for your support. If you like our content and you want to help us out, you can go to patreon.com/mastering D&D. Even if you can't support us in that way, it would be super helpful if you would go to the places where you listen and leave us a review because that helps other people understand that sometimes we do good stuff here. And you can also subscribe to our YouTube channel, which is youtube.com/at mastering dungeons. So, Teos, where can people find your great work?
Oof. Well, find me at alphastream.org. You can read that article I talked about last week on Emerald City Comic Con. And one of the fun things people have been enjoying is looking at the character sheets that we used. And that's been fun for folks to look at.
There
Where do
you
we
go.
find you, Shawn?
You can find me on Twitter at Shawn Merwin, and you can follow the podcast at Mastering D&D on all of the social media sites like Twitter and Mastodon and Blue Sky. You can join our community and ask us questions and talk to us via Patreon. We have a Discord where our Patreon supporters can congregate and often have great discussions. And you can leave comments on our YouTube channel, Mastering Dungeons. Whew. So we've entered the village. We are looking for adventure. What are we going to do now?
Hmm. Well, I'm going to look for a drunk called Otis.
Hmm. Hmm. I'm going to go to the third barn on the left and go to the hay mound and dig up the +1 dagger and 250 gold pieces because I have a feeling it's there.
That's good town design.
Hmm.